I just noticed that the camera went off because I guess we talked for a long time. But so James was talking about ancient female rulers, women who ruled the world 3,500 years ago. And so he will talk about that now.
So this is put on by a woman from UCLA, that's University of California, Los Angeles. Presumably she's a professor there. Presumably she has a PhD. I found it a little bit hard to distinguish. I wasn't listening that carefully at the beginning, but she has some sort of background in anthropology, maybe in archaeology, maybe in history. She should really have a background in all three to be talking about what she's talking about. So her basic thesis seems to be that women have just got it bad. They've had it bad. They still do when it comes to being leaders, because they get demonized, or she wouldn't say demonicized. I just make a joke about that or whatever. Someone with more horsepower than sense using the alley here. So I just noticed kind of like a hole in the gate where the dogs might be able to sneak out. I prefer them not to. Why? Because we've got all sorts of idiots going down the alley, and they could easily run over one of our dogs if one of our dogs escape. So, getting back to this woman's thesis, women have got it tough. So she flashes 4 relatively contemporary leaders on the screen. They're mugs and mug shots. And there's Hillary Clinton there. Yeah, she's been demonized by people on the right. Also demonized by people on the left. I know one PhD person who thinks that Hillary Clinton, of course, he thinks just as badly, maybe even worse, of Bill Clinton. But yeah, so right and left extremes absolutely hate Hillary Clinton. Margaret Thatcher, she flashes on the screen and thinks, it's you, nifty shifty, hefty lefties that so demonize Margaret Thatcher. There are all sorts of right-wingers who absolutely adore her. There are many right-wingers, like global capitalist supporters, globalist capitalist supporters, who think she was a better leader than Ronald Reagan. And I'm talking about men. I'm not talking about women. So what's this about? Yeah, why is her mug flash there? I didn't get a chance to see because I was listening. I just looked in for a couple of seconds, so I wasn't able to catch the other 2 mugs there. And you know, I'm not that thrilled about Margaret Thatcher, but I wouldn't demonize her the way she. I mean, I know one guy who I hung with a bit in the mid '80s. He was the one who was saying, "Oh, 1984 was 1984. 1984 was written about George Orwell's 1984. Was written about Margaret Thatcher's Britain." Of course, this guy was a communist. Yeah. No, it was written about communists. Anyway, yeah, that's really demonizing Margaret Thatcher. To say her little regime or whatever was like 1984. I don't think she would have even dreamed in her wildest dreams of having a little Stalin-esque like regime as the regime portrayed in 1984. Anyway, so this lecture, whatever her name is, really seems to idealize Egyptian culture. So she goes and says, in ancient times, I believe she's saying ancient times, there's no tradition, historical tradition, where the social system, social-political system, socio-political system that allowed so many queens to exist. And she should be saying per unit time. So she accepts the traditional chronology for Egypt, it seems. And so she's saying, oh, it goes back 3,000 years. Wow. Now, technically, like I knew about 4 queens of Egypt. And that would go back to using the traditional chronology, conventional chronology, I should say. Go back 3000 BC, and I'm going to go down to the time of the Persian takeover of Egypt, roughly 500 BC. So I think 525 BC. Cambyses was not the first guy. I think it was Cyrus who set up the Persian Empire. It might be as early as 550 BC, or maybe a little bit earlier. But Cambyses took over Egypt. So I'm going from 3000 BC to, that's 2,500 years. Go back 2,500 years from now, you're back to the Persian Empire, 500 BC. A long time. And to have, by her count, 5 queens during that time. That's 1 every 500 years. Oh, so you go back 500 years in the British tradition. How many queens have they had? Oh, a little bit of a problem. Because I don't know if there's been Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria. Both ruled long periods of time. I think Victoria over 60 years, Queen Elizabeth at least parts of 70 years. Going back to 1937, almost 200 years, like roughly 2/3 of the time with just 2 queens. The rest were a bunch of flunky kings. And they're constitutional monarchs. So you go back to William and Mary.
James's dessert.
Queen Anne, William and Mary. Mary was the real monarch there. William was just a Dutch, or more like a military leader. And those are basically constitutional monarchs. But you got Queen Elizabeth, and before her Queen Mary. So you got two queens over England, and that would go back to William the Conqueror. I don't know if I can't recall any queens ruling in a titular fashion over England between Mary and William the Conqueror, but that would be 600 years, 2 and 600. Well, that's 1 every. No, is that 600 years? Yeah, it is. Well, it's less than 600. It's like 1066, and Queen Elizabeth died just after 1600 AD. So that's 2 and 500 years. Now she's saying, there's nothing like this. Like the Egyptians, 1 every 500 years. Like, give me some stats. More importantly, get the stats in your head before you start drawing conclusions. She's clueless. When you look at the Neo-Assyrian Empire, she mentioned Semiramis. I've forgotten what her real name was. She actually existed. And she was the regent for her son, apparently, Adad-Nirari. They number him the 3rd. And they're going, she's saying, she was demonized and that sort of stuff. Not necessarily in the Assyrian tradition. We've got some stories. Some of them have ended up having very legendary kind of features. But she, I think, as opposed to her son, was highly successful. How successful? The Akkadian Empire, which they say started 2300 BC and ended maybe 2100 BC. It's a long time ago. The dating is off by maybe 150 years, maybe 150 years too deep. But they actually conquered Egypt. No. That's what they say. That's what they said in their inscriptions. And of course, in modern day Assyriologists to please. So the Akkadian Empire wasn't like in Nova Scotia or something like that, or the Cajun Empire in Louisiana. Akkadian Empire was out of the area that around Baghdad nowadays. That was around Babylon. But Babylon, although, again, they don't recognize it existed, it actually existed. That's where the guy who headed up the Akkadian Empire came from originally. His capital, the one that he created, was called Akkad, or Akkad. I don't know where the accent comes. But he came from there. He came from Babylon. It was just small potatoes. And it was even small potatoes when he took over. But he claimed to have conquered Egypt, Magan. We know it's Magan from later inscriptions put up by the Assyrians, roughly 670 BC. Magan is the delta area of Egypt. Oh, there's a poor bird caught there pulling in the behind the screen there. Oh. I hope it doesn't get injured. Did it get out? Or did it fall down? It was behind the screen. That's good. I hope it's okay. Sorry about that interruption there. It's much more important than anything I might say, much less what this poor benighted academic has to say. Yeah, poor thing. I don't know how it did it. Anyway, it managed to fly away, so it didn't injure its wings. It was in desperation. Anyway, that kind of distracted me. So I was talking about, Magan. Magan, delta area of Egypt. Just no getting over it. Except when you're dealing with an Assyriologist trying to please the Egyptologists, and they're very screwed up chronologies. Screwed up in at least two different ways. It's screwed up for the New Kingdom, and it's screwed up for the Old Kingdom. Two different reasons. But so the dating systems for Egypt and for Mesopotamia are off. And in the case of the Old Kingdom, they're off by hundreds and hundreds of years. How much time? 10?
More than that.
Okay. Hundreds and hundreds of years. And so when Sargon the First, or not the first, but Sargon the Great, Sargon the First ruled over Assyria much later. Well, not much later. Quite a few hundred years ago. When he conquered Magan, he actually did. He conquered the delta area. And then, his grandson, Sargon the Great's grandson, Naram-Sin, it should actually be read Naram-Zu-En. That's the way it's written. He said he actually took the ruler of Magan off in chains to Akkad. He actually did. He took Pharaoh is much older. I think it means great house or something. Pharaoh, great house is what it means. Not White House, but great house. But I think it is actually an anachronism to use it for this period way back when. But took off the ruler of Egypt, and that's an actual. This is not myth or legend or some guy boasting about something that didn't really happen. It happened, and it would, you'd think, be the end of a dynasty. The name is given as Manu or Manu Danu. And what does that mean? It's kind of like a pun. Taking the original name of this Egyptian king, and Manu Danu means who is strong. Who is strong? It's ironic, right? Who is strong? Not this king that has been taken off by Naram-Sin. And from what I can tell, there are only, there are only 31 dynasties in Egypt. you're looking for a king who has a name that's kind of like Manu Danu. And you look at the most likely prospect in terms of linguistics, in terms of phonetics, and it's Montuhotep. At the end, I believe, of the 11th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. But the funny thing about the end of that dynasty is it went from strength to even greater strength with the 12th dynasty. It's almost as though there was no changeover with the change in dynasty. So that one just doesn't seem to work out. Then you realize that the Mesopotamians screwed up M's and U's. And so did the Egyptians, M's and U's. So what we're looking now is Wanu Danu. And, one of the versions, I believe it says Wanu. Who is that? There's only one king. And he comes at the end of the 6th dynasty. Weni, or as the Greeks, they gave it the masculine ending with an S, Wenis, or Unis. Okay, there we go. End of the 6th dynasty. And there's a king list in Egypt, and it goes through the 5th into the 6th dynasty. So did I say it was the end of the 6th dynasty? The end of the 5th dynasty. And they're going, why? When it's going through, does seem to be a break with the Egyptian history after the 6th dynasty. I mean, things really went kaput, but with this one king list, there's a big line between the 5th and the 6th dynasty. That line is the Akkadian takeover by Naram Sin. And I'm going to tell you who that Naram Sin is. Naram Zu N. Okay? We're off by hundreds of years with the traditional, conventional Egyptian chronology. We're off by 100 years. I don't care. You've got to take the synchronisms and then you deal with the chronology that they give you. You don't go around and just say, like it goes back to so-called Sir Flinders Petrie. You don't do that. He has a guy called Narmer Zaw. And he says, he's many, or Menes as the Greeks called him, the first king in all the Egyptian tradition, the first king of the 1st dynasty. Say what? They're not the same name. That's not a synchronism. You cannot. And why does he do it? Civilization couldn't have been invented in Egypt because that's in Africa. You think that guy was a racist? Yeah, he was a real racist, not racially prejudiced. Okay? Flinders Petrie. And so nowadays they don't even accept that synchronism, many being Narmer Zaw. They say Narmer Zaw was 0 dynasty, before the 1st dynasty. So they roughly keep the chronology that comes from this faulty reasoning, and they don't re-reason it. You've got to throw the whole thing out, because you're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You're throwing out the thing that caused the ring around the bathtub with the bathwater. When you throw out Flinders, so-called Sir Flinders Petrie reconstruction, deconstruction, whatever, of Egyptian chronology, then what you do is you say, okay, who is this guy? It's Mesopotamian material that you find with Narmer Zaw. It has a rosette at the beginning. What is that? We don't know what it is. They call it the golden rosette. It is the symbol for star in Akkadian. And it can be read in a variety of different ways. It can be star, it can be heaven. And if you read it as heaven, it's An. And presumably it was considered a divinity. Because what the Egyptians did when they had a divinity in a name, didn't matter if it came at the end, in the beginning, in the middle, but or at the beginning, it was put at the beginning. And so what you do is you've got Nar, Mer, Za, and you've got that star at the beginning, you put it at the end, and then you've got Nar, Mer, Za, An. That's Nerem, Zu, En. Yeah, there's an extra R in there, but when you're going from one language to another, that's basically a slam dunk. There's only 2 times in the history of ancient Mesopotamia when the Mesopotamians said they took over Egypt. And you're stuck with the Akkadians, roughly, let's say, 2200 BC on the conventional chronology, or the Assyrians. Exact date 734 BC. Which do you prefer? Yeah, it's the Akkadians, because holy smokes, if it's the Assyrians, the Egyptian chronology is so whacked, it's incredible. Instead of being a few hundred years off, it would be more than 1,000 years off. Okay? So you've got these women and stuff like that. I'll have to do another show on this, because believe me, she's not the only person who's screwed up about Egyptian stuff. But at any rate, this woman, Marin Ray or whatever her name was, wasn't really a queen. So the next one she mentions is, in other words, she was kind of made buried as a king. Sobek Nofru. Sobek was their crocodile god. And Nefer, I think, Nofru Nefer kind of means like beautiful or something, like beauty of the crocodile god. Okay. So she was the last of a line. So when she's saying there's a crisis as the queen comes along, because there's no royal male heirs. So then they're stuck. Okay, we're stuck. We've got to put a woman in this position. Or in the case of Hatshepsut, we've got a son who's 2 years old. He can't rule. So in this case, it wasn't his mother, Thutmose III, it was his aunt. So let me see. So Sobek Nofru's, her pa had no heir, and she's kind of laughing about that because they had harems, and she's figuring maybe the guy was sterile. I think she mentioned that possibility. Another possibility is Amenhotep III had himself dressed in women's clothing, and he did, I think, have an heir, but I'm not so sure.
Because he was probably homosexual.
Possibly, or maybe just a cross-dresser or something like that. We don't have really good information.
Yeah, but you're saying if he didn't have an heir, it could be that he was a homosexual.
Yeah, in the case of Amenhotep III, the guy who succeeded him was Akhenaten, who was the heretic pharaoh. So they claim he was wanting to do. He actually had Amun's name scratched out, a god's name scratched out on inscriptions. And believe me, that didn't make Akhenaten popular with the priests, the priestly class, and all that sort of stuff, or just religious traditionalists. But you see, there's this one inscription, and she thinks it's Nefertiti. She's going, wow, like Nefertiti, they kind of got indications that there's stuff behind King Tut's tomb. And she's figuring it's Nefertiti, and I'm going, could be anything, could be anyone. This is in the Valley of the Kings. Get it straight. There was a Valley of the Queens, right? 2 different valleys. So Nefertiti presumably would have been buried there, but she might have been buried in central Egypt. Thebes was the traditional capital, and Akhenaten's capital, he set it up in the middle of Egypt. So let me see other notes. So she says Sobek Nofru was early on. 12th dynasty. There were only 31 dynasties. That's not early on. Get it straight. Okay? It's more than a third of the way through, at least in terms of counting dynasties. Jeez. So now we're on to Hatshepsut. She was the daughter and sister and wife of a king. Not the same king, but... okay, so she was married to Thutmose III, who they've got his mummy, and apparently suffered from smallpox, so he's weak. He died after 2 or 3 years of rule. And so the heir to Thutmose II was Thutmose III. And for 7 years he was the regent, so Thutmose III was 2 years at his accession, 2 years old. 7 years Hatshepsut was the regent, and then apparently 15 years after, for 15 years after that she was king. So 22 years total, that makes it 24 years when Thutmose III took over. And he's considered the most powerful of all Egyptian monarchs. I'm skeptical. When you look at the Old Kingdom and what they did in terms of monuments, they're the ones. The Old Kingdom, not the Middle Kingdom, and definitely not the New Kingdom. They're the ones, the Old Kingdom, who put up these huge pyramids. My suspicion is their empire spread well into Western Asia. Southwestern Asia, she gets on her high horse and keeps on referring to the area in the Fertile Crescent as Northwestern Asia. Northwestern Asia is on the Arctic Ocean, right? Because here's Asia, here's the Ural Mountains, here's, up here, the border between Europe and Asia, and down here you've got the southern end of Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. So to call this area in here Northwestern Europe is wrong. It's
Asia.
South, or
Yeah.
Northwestern Asia. It's Southwestern Asia. So I don't know what her education is. Maybe she just had a glitch, but they should have errata at the end. I made a mistake, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
But I mean, you're very much a fan of this female ruler that she is also very much a fan.
Yeah, but she's saying she left Egypt more powerful than it ever been. Arts flourished, and I'm going, you don't understand. The little guy that took over is a guy, Thutmose III. He was a big conqueror. And he's the one, you know, like it's just a matter of being off by a ring. He's the one that went way into, basically, I think he was one of the ones that went and hunted elephants in Syria. So he's almost like in Turkey. He probably was into parts of Turkey. That's coming from Egypt. Got that straight, folks? So that's when you see, like, she didn't have campaigns. Where do you get wealth from? You get it from trading and stuff like that. She did some trading. You get it in ancient times from going and taking one-time taxes.
And that's another thing she said. She was saying that the place that she went on a trading expedition to was mythical. She referred to it as mythical.
Oh my God, the mythical punt. It's not mythical. She actually, you know, she had her artists. She probably took artists along with drawing pictures of fish in the sea and stuff like that. Drawing callipygious women, fat, butted women. Okay, so more on this later.